All right, Gaza War, SITREP Day 108 of the war. This is a military analysis that does not disdain Arab military abilities and understands guerrilla warfare. Thank you for everybody who's joined in. Please like and subscribe and all that stuff. Today, there's the many headlines and escalations to track. And then I'm going to talk, as I promised, about the parallel processes of genocide and war, which is something of an answer or an explanation to those who say things like, on the pro-Israel side, people who say things like, well, if it was going so well militarily for the resistance, then why are they seeking a ceasefire? And the reason is that a genocide against civilians can, it seems, and historically speaking, has precedent that it can be pursued whether the military side of the conflict is going well or badly. And when I talk about this, I'll be using the most quintessential example of genocide we have available to us in history. And when I get into it, we'll get into the specifics. But first of all, I think we should talk about the massive event that took place in al-Maghazi camp, in refugee camp in central Gaza. And you have, I'm sure, already heard about this, but what happened, it appears to be that a group of Israeli soldiers, a fairly large group in the 20s, at least, according to the numbers killed, was wiring up a building for destruction, for explosion, as they've done since the ground invasion many times. They've gone in with mines, big mines, and wired them up all around, as you would in a controlled demolition. And you've probably seen, for example, the way that they did this with Palestine University. If you haven't seen the destruction of Palestine University, it was vaporized by 300 of these mines. I'm just showing you Arya, Aryjeay, his feed, but you can see the destruction of Palestine University. This was not from an airstrike. This was a cluster of buildings that were wired to explode after being used in the ground invasion for more than a couple of months, apparently, and then just completely vaporized. They used over 300 mines to destroy Palestine University. And you may have even seen TikTok videos where they show them wiring up things to explode, and they show them exploding things. You've seen probably many such videos of Israeli soldiers looking at the camera, gesturing to the destruction of buildings and apartment blocks. So they were doing this, wiring up an apartment block to explode, when their entire unit was hit with at least one, maybe more, rocket-propelled grenade, and that caused the detonation of all of the wired explosives. So the Arya's summary of Hamas's statement on this. Al-Qassam, the armed wing of Hamas, issued an update on yesterday's big event. Exactly 4 p.m. yesterday, the Qassam brigades executed a complex operation, targeted a building housing a Zionist engineering force with an anti-personnel shell, causing the ammunition and engineering equipment it possessed to explode. Subsequently, the fighters destroyed a Merkava tank that was providing cover for the force and detonated a minefield, blowing up another Zionist force in the same location, resulting in casualties, deaths, and injuries. The fighters withdrew safely to their bases. There's more to this story because there is apparently the Israeli Air Force followed this up with airstrikes on the tank. So Israeli Air Force may yet again have conducted an airstrike against Israeli military personnel. So on top of contending with their own wired explosives, which killed many of them, and the resistance forces, which killed many of them, they're also at risk of being killed by their own Air Force yet again. So Gaza, inside Gaza, there's also a video. I'll leave John Elmer and the Electronic Intifada folks to break down. They do better breakdowns of this type of video, but there's a video. If you take a look, if you look around, there's a video circulating today. It's about 3 minutes long of a body cam of one of the Israeli soldiers inside a building, and there's a firefight. You can see the firefight from the Israeli perspective. As far as I could tell, you can't see any Palestinian fighters in this video, but you do see Israeli fighters from the unit getting hit and falling. There's a blanket involved and so on. So take a look at those as well. Also in Gaza, there is the continuing destruction of Israeli armored vehicles, military D9 bulldozers, Merkava tanks, all being destroyed by the famous Yasin 105 rocket-propelled grenade. Also sniper operations of many in number. There's also video of sniper operations and a lot in Khan Yunis, still some in Gaza City. So there's still some in North Gaza. There's also a very impressive video. Again, I'll leave the details of this to the probably upcoming breakdown on Electronic Intifada. But there's a video which the Al-Quds brigades, the Soraya Al-Quds of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad's armed wing, of how they captured Israeli quadcopter surveillance drones, got the footage from the drones, and used the footage from those drones to determine positions of Israeli occupying infantry and armor and their locations, and then used those to target mortar attacks and basically shelling and rocket attacks and mortar attacks. So they're capturing drones from the Israelis and using them in their own targeting. Okay, let us leave Gaza because there are many other fronts to catch up on. One of them being Lebanon, where Israel has been conducting airstrikes on what look to me like civilian targets. There's a car bomb, a drone strike on a car bomb near Bint Jbeil, killing 2. There was another drone strike in southern Lebanon that killed 5. So there were at least two different airstrikes in southern Lebanon. And Lebanon, Hizbollah has been striking Israel as well. So Hezbollah has hit this. You remember when some days ago, Hezbollah struck the Meron Air Force radar, Air Force surveillance base. They struck that again. They've been attacking with rockets against various targets on the border, Rahib, Abu Dajjaj, Al-Samaka, and the Shaba farms, a group of Israeli soldiers with rockets. So there have been many rocket attacks. The Meron air base, air surveillance base, for the second time, Hezbollah says, a number of missiles achieving direct hits and causing injuries. So that would be probably the bigger of the rocket attacks from Hezbollah, but not the only one. And now we go to Iraq. And yes, I'm saving Yemen for last. Vis-a-vis Iraq and Syria, Iraq, Syria will put together, probably not for the last time in these sit reps, because it is the resistance groups in Iraq that are mostly responsible for hitting targets in Syria. And it is inside Syria where Israel seems to attack, for example, Iran. So a couple of sit reps ago, I talked about the various Iran missile strikes into Iraq and Syria. And also, as you know, Pakistan came in for a missile strike as well. Pakistan then attacked also Baloch on the Iranian side of the border. But Israel attacked and assassinated several Iranian military advisors inside of Damascus a couple of days ago. In between the last sit rep, there were 4 military advisors, Hojatollah Omidvar, Ali Aghazadeh, Hossein Mohammadi, and Saeed Karimi, and Rashid Islam Mohammed Amin Samadi. So there's 5 martyrs, 5 Iranian advisors that were killed in Syria. In Damascus, actually, assassinated in Damascus by a Israeli drone. So an Iraqi drone attacked the port of Ashdod. This is interesting. If you look at a map of where Ashdod is, it's one of the targets that often is hit by, if I remember correctly, let me make sure that I'm right. I believe it's one of the hits it's one of the targets that's often hit by rockets from Gaza. Yeah, I'm right. I'll just show you really quick. You can see it's on the coast. It's a port. Here's Gaza. Ashkelon is frequently hit by rockets, and Ashdod is beyond, a little bit beyond Ashkelon. And Ashdod, the Iraqi resistance is claiming to have hit the port of Ashdod with drones. This is apparently the first time the Iraqi resistance has hit Ashdod with a drone. So another escalation. In addition to that one, there were 2 big attacks on the Ain-al-Asad base in western Iraq, another US base. You know from the sit reps and also the news that the Iraqi resistance has been attacking the US bases in Iraq more or less since the Gaza War started. And the US has also been hitting the Iraqi resistance now with air raids. There was an air raid in Jurf al-Nasr in Iraq. They killed 2 members of the Iraqi resistance. They bombed. The Americans are saying that was in response to the Ain-al-Asad attack. So so on the Iraq front, it's not just what's happening. It's not just the drones and missiles that are speaking. There was an important speech from one of the Iraqi resistance leaders, Abu Ala al-Walai. And Abu Ala al-Walai has said on Twitter At a time when the criminal American occupation is again blatantly targeting our security forces and our sacred crowd in a number of areas of Iraq, we urge the Mujahideen of the Islamic Resistance in Iraq to begin the second phase of their blessed operations, which includes enforcing the blockade on Zionist maritime navigation in the Mediterranean Sea and removing the entity's ports until the Zionist usurper is out of service. And this will continue until the unjust siege on Gaza is lifted and the horrific Zionist massacres against its people are stopped. So now, if this is within the means of the Iraqi resistance, we are in a new phase of the shipping, Israeli shipping, now facing a blockade, not just in the Red Sea, but also in the other direction from the Mediterranean. Just so we are clear on what's going on here, I'll show you on a map. Maybe we'll just go back to a map of Ashdod and zoom out, because if you, yeah, here's a suitably zoomed out situation. What's going on is this. Here is Yemen, and here's the Red Sea, and Yemen has basically said, if you want to go through here and you want to go and you want to reach any of these places and get through the Suez Canal and have access to all of these ports and customers, then you cannot be affiliated or doing business with Israel. So Yemen has the ability to stop naval traffic from going through here. And the alternative to going through here for a lot of shipping, if you're not going to go through here to get to these places, you've got to go all the way around Africa, which is, for commercial shipping, a huge, huge delay and a huge cost. And these costs have been accumulating over time. Now, Iraq, what Iraq is saying, Iraq, as you can see, does not have Iraq is on the Persian Gulf. Iraq does not have access to the Mediterranean, but it does have missiles that access that may be able to reach, and that may be what they're talking about. If they have missiles that can reach that far coast of Israel and Haifa from here, that means they also may be able to try to blockade shipping. Now, if shipping can't go this way to Israel and can't go that way to Israel, that means no shipping to Israel, period. And that then Israel is in a situation of trying to get stuff over land. They'll have to get stuff over land via Egypt. They'll have to get stuff over land via Jordan. They'll have to get stuff over land via Saudi Arabia. And that'll be, again, a major logistical issue, delay, and also creates military opportunities for interruption and capture and piracy, raids, banditry, you name it. So there are I don't know how big of a threat this is, but Iraq at least one group in Iraq is saying we're moving to a phase 2 of blockading Israeli shipping in the Mediterranean. So potentially big news. I think I mentioned, in case I didn't, there's another base, the US base in Konoko Field inside Syria has been under fire by the Iraqi resistance. This is just, I mean, the US presence in Iraq is unwanted and illegal. They occupied Iraq in 2003 and haven't left. But the presence in Syria is even more outrageous in the sense that they're just squatting on a part of Syria's territory, stealing oil and wheat. It is pretty, what's the word? It's very arrogant and very brazen. I think the word I was looking for was brazen. It's a very brazen position that they've taken, occupying a part of Syria there. So they're under attack from Iraqi resistance as well. Now, I believe what I have left is Yemen. Oh, Yemen. Oh, let me just say one last thing. The Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran, he said something I think important. He said, the leaders of Islamic countries declare that a ceasefire must take place in Gaza. It's again off of Aria's feed. And yet they articulate aspirations beyond their control and influence. Instead, why not focus on actions that are well within their control? Specifically, they must sever the vital lifelines of the Zionist regime. They can stop their support, their political and economic support to the Zionist regime. This is really, I think that was a really good point that Ayatollah Khamenei made. He's saying, why call for things, you know, make statements about how it would be nice to have this nice thing when you actually have power to influence events that you're not using? What's the point of making these declarations when you have power that you're not using? And I think that was what you might call a subtweet, especially towards Turkey, but also Egypt. But I think especially Turkey, which has been very loud about support for the Palestinians, but also economically speaking, constantly sending supplies, doing billions of dollars of business with Israel. And so kind of giving the lie to the statements, and the Iranian religious leader is saying, you know, what's the point of making these statements when you're not actually using the leverage that you do have? Okay, I believe now we officially have Yemen, which is left. And Yemen, the United States has been ramping up their attacks on Yemen. I think they've attacked Yemen 5 times in the past couple of days, bombing in Sana'a especially, but also the governorates of Taiz, Al-Baida, and Hajjah. So there's lots of attacks on Yemen. And as you might have guessed, Yemen remains completely undeterred and is completely blasé about these attacks. They responded by attacking yet another ship, the Ocean Jazz, it's called. And if you guys do watch I actually want to mention 2 things. One thing is Yahya Sari, one of the spokespeople, the military leaders of Yemen, and his conferences. The way that he talks is absolutely amazing. I'll say no more. Just watch him talk. The way that he says Ocean Jazz, the way that he says any of the things that he says, you really should watch it. He has a way of delivering the news, and the Ocean Jazz apparently is a ship that carries important military equipment. It's manned by merchant mariners and routinely carries oversized U.S. military equipment. It's a military target, and it was hit by the Yemenis. This is Revolutionary EM, which is another very worthwhile account if you're on Twitter. Very much worth following. So the Ocean Jazz, and then in retaliation for that, apparently, Yemen was attacked. Now, I've said before, many people have noted that Yemen is not a stranger to being bombed by U.S. bombs and U.S. air raids. It just happened that these were launched supposedly by Saudi Arabia from 2015 to 2022. So over the course of over the course of this almost a decade of bombing from Saudi Arabia, Yemen and the Houthis, the so-called Houthis or Ansarallah, they shot down quite a few of the aircraft that were sent against them. There's an infographic that was produced that shows the various aircraft that have been shot down or lost, otherwise lost. 4 Reaper drones, 1 Osprey helicopter, 1 Black Hawk helicopter, 1 F-16. Then from the United Arab Emirates, another F-16. Bahrain lost an F-16. And any F-16s here? Eurofighter Typhoon from Saudi Arabia, 2 F-15s, 3 Tornado warplanes, and then a whole lot of drones. A whole lot of drones from all of the coalition that was bombing Yemen. So if the US intends to continue this operation, which by all accounts they do, the first, it seems to me at least, war that has been started solely to protect a genocide. So an interesting historical era that we live in for sure. And if they persist, they're going to lose more aircraft, they're going to lose more ships, and they are not going to stop the Yemenis. There is something that will stop Ansarallah, and that is the end of the aggression on Gaza. They've been very clear about that being the only thing that's going to stop them. So escalation continues. There is Sharmeen Narwani of the Cradle, the editor of The Cradle, another indispensable resource in this particular war, if you're interested in this war. Sharmeen tweeted, she was tweeting a mainstream source which describes the strategy of the US here. And it's very interesting because I think I've mentioned this before. The strategy isn't exactly to stop the Houthis from stopping shipping by bombing them until they submit. The strategy is actually to try to make everybody suffer so much that they try to stop the Houthis too. So a senior administration official laid it out as follows: the US attacks on Houthi targets will degrade their abilities, increase the sanctions pressure, and eventually, this is the key paragraph, the official continued, regional countries and other nations with an interest in open sea lanes, China, for example, will demand an end to the shipping crisis that has inflated prices and imperiled lives. Meanwhile, Israel's going to kill less civilians, sure, and that's going to weaken the Houthis' case for rising to the Palestinians' defense. Totally. So that's the strategy. The strategy is actually to try to make things worse for everybody so that everybody puts pressure on the Houthis. And as we've seen, pressure on the Houthis can only be from a position of moral righteousness, and they're not going to listen to anything else. So this is just going to keep going the way that it's been going. Okay, so that concludes the rundown of headlines. Now I want to talk about the idea of war and genocide going in parallel. And to do this, I had to read a book. I mean, I've been slowly studying World War II my whole life, but more intensively for the past maybe year and a half as we've approached it. People don't know. I know how YouTube works. YouTube works a little differently. I know a lot of you just came here because this was put in front of you and you want Gaza War analysis, but I do a podcast with the name The Anti-Empire Project, and it doesn't have this same content. The Gaza War sit reps are not on the podcast. The podcast doesn't have the Gaza War sit reps. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how much of that I want to repost, but the point is a lot of the podcast is historical and our history is chronological, and it started in the 1500s and it's been going for the past 3 years, and we're approaching World War II. So I've been reading ahead and I'm trying to prepare for World War II, which will probably be in a year or two that we get to it. But I read a book by Arno Meyer called Why Did the Heavens Not Darken? The Final Solution in History. And Arno Meyer is a historian. The book is from 1998. Arno Meyer is a European. He talks about his background. He's West European Jewish background, very important scholar of World War One, 19th century, and post World War One, and he kind of explains that he didn't feel, as somebody with like a holistic view of history, that he could avoid talking about the Holocaust, and he didn't like the idea that the Holocaust was just going to be the purview of specialists, and because the era that he studied, he felt, which was World War One and before and just after, was really key to understanding how the Holocaust happened. And that's all good, but the main thesis of this book is that the Holocaust, the genocide against the Jews specifically, grew ever more intense in relation to the military losses that the Nazis were taking on the Eastern Front. So rough history of World War II. Apologies if you already know this, but Hitler invaded Poland and Czechoslovakia and Austria with almost no opposition, and then invaded France and took France down very quickly in this what's called blitzkrieg. You've all heard blitzkrieg, lightning war. So it was this theory of warfare that they do fast war, they take the capital, they overwhelm their opponent psychologically, and the war is over before the other side can get organized. And that's great for Germany too, because the long war means stretched logistics, strains on their natural resource base, of which they are somewhat lacking, and they don't have the colonies that the British and the French have to get those resources. So they want to fight short wars, and they manage to, up until they decided to finally do what they always wanted to do, which is destroy the communists and destroy the communist revolution. That was always their target, was the Soviet Union. And so they were expecting, the plan was another blitzkrieg, another lightning campaign in the East, and then boom, the Bolsheviks are gone, and then we get to, some of these lands go to expand Germany in a colonial fashion, so that Eastern Europe becomes like the frontier for Germany, so they can reproduce what the Americans did to indigenous people on the Western North American continent. Like this is all stuff everybody knows, I'm sure. So the problem was that when they attacked the Soviet Union in 1941, they did not have the rapid victory that they expected. They had some rapid victory, they did, but resistance got stiffer and stiffer, and the Bolsheviks did not surrender, and they did not stop, and they continuously were able to raise more and more fighting men, more and more, bring more and more weaponry to bear, and they made the Nazis suffer for their advance, and then eventually, starting, I don't know, about a year and a half later, ultimately maybe two and a half years later, they started to roll them back, and then the Germans were actually starting to move back, and then that the Soviet Union entered into Germany and partitioned Germany itself. So some quotes from So the operation was called Operation Barbarossa. The invasion was, I think, in June 1941. And it all was very fast, right? So the first month of Operation Barbarossa, Eastern Galicia, current Ukraine, was seized. Parts of the Ukraine, White Russia, Latvia, all of Lithuania, crushed 90 enemy divisions. So the numbers here are mind-boggling, especially if you compare them to the sizes, the numbers of military personnel are mind-boggling if you compare them to the Israel war in Gaza right now on the Palestinians. But 600,000 prisoners, half the Soviet Air Force, large quantities of military hardware, all destroyed. On July 3rd, General Franz Halder confidently concluded that the German fighting machine had won within a fortnight. A day later, Hitler exulted that the Soviets had virtually lost the war. Certain of victory, they started thinking about occupation and security of the Russian orbit, but there were a number of warning signs, danger signals. Its infantry divisions lost only 20% of their effectives. 50% of the tanks and motor vehicles of the armored divisions were destroyed or disabled. This is by August. So they started heading towards Moscow, and they expected to take Moscow, but they didn't take Moscow. And by August 1941, 5 weeks after having claimed victory, General Halder concluded that it was becoming ever clearer that we have underestimated the organizational and economic strength, the transportation system, and above all, the purely military efficiency of the Russian colossus. So already about a month and a half into the invasion, things were starting to look like not what they expected. There were still big victories ahead, but costly, and no matter how much they destroyed of the Soviet army, there still was more. By where are we? By October, German armies had smashed countless enemy divisions, taken 2.4 million prisoners, destroyed or captured 17,000 tanks, 21,000 field guns, shot down or destroy 14,000 airplanes. The world had never seen anything like it. But the Soviets didn't surrender. So October, so we're 3-4 months in, and there's still no surrender. And by 1942 is when they're starting to talk about final solution, etc. So I'm just looking for quotes about. So one of the issues is their philosophy of mass punishment, of resistance, of guerrilla resistance. So communist so-called partisans, and they would kill 100 for every. Here's one quote from General Keitel, or office, General Keitel. He says, in expiation for the life of each German soldier, between 50 and 100 communists would be shot in public for maximum effect. So they're doing public mass killing in order to show that the life of a German soldier is worth 50 to 100 than the people that they're occupying. So there's von Reichenau, who's another one of these commanders, Field Marshal von Reichenau. In October, he issues a directive for the conduct of troops in the Eastern Theater, seeks the complete destruction of the instruments of power of the Judeo-Bolshevik system and the extermination of Asiatic influences in the European cultural sphere. So the army must go beyond conventional combat according to the rules of warfare. Each German soldier is the carrier of a ruthless national ideology and the avenger of all past bestialities inflicted on the German people and its kinsfolk. He exhorts his soldiers to have a full understanding of the necessity to take hard but righteous reprisals against Jewish subhumanity, because Jews are the instigators of terrorism in the rear of the Wehrmacht. He says, there are no grounds to make prisoners of brutal partisans and degenerate women and treat civilian snipers and loiterers as decent soldiers to be spared. It's nothing more, von Reichenau, Field Marshal von Reichenau says, than misguided humanitarianism to feed enemy populations and prisoners of war in military kitchens and to distribute cigarettes and bread to them. Nor is there any reason to preserve public buildings, except when needed to billet soldiers. Some of these buildings are symbols of the Bolshevik regime, and in keeping with the war of extermination, they should be destroyed, regardless of their historical or artistic value. So, it's this rage that the surrender they're expecting is not coming that leads to ever more destructive reprisal against civilians who are not fighters. They are, what do they say? They cannot. General Erich von Manstein of the 11th Army in November 20th issues a similar order in Crimea. You may have heard of this place recently. Crimea has a large Jewish community at this time, and he says, since June 22nd, this he's writing in November 1941, the German people have been locked in a life and death struggle with the Bolshevik system this war cannot be fought according to the customary conventions of European warfare. Bolsheviks are using terror to unsettle the civilian population and fostering famine in the cities by disrupting agricultural and factory production. So they're blaming the famine that they're imposing as part of their hunger plan, which was pretty explicit. They're accusing the Bolsheviks, the people they're occupying, of causing that famine. So they order arrests of hostages, of all individuals related to partisans, all individuals suspected of being in contact with partisans, all individuals who occupied official positions before the arrival of German troops are to be held hostage in concentration camps. For every German soldier, 10 of these hostages are to be executed. For every German or Romanian soldier wounded, one hostage was to be shot. In some places, the entire male population was shot. They seize cattle, confiscate furs, boots, seize horses, sleds, wagons. So they're destroying everything. It's they also don't make provision. So Arno Meyer says, when planning their campaign, Hitler's generals had been too ideologically intoxicated and self-confident to make provisions to care for the masses of prisoners they meant and had to capture. This military malpractice was to have catastrophic consequences, especially once the Blitzkrieg stalled. But even before that, the generals took a step which was in the keeping with the crusading character of the war, the cutting of rations, changing the rations, lowered the rations of Soviet prisoners to 500 calories. Soviet prisoners of war, you may or may not know, had some unbelievable death rate. I believe 4 million Soviet prisoners of war died. Basically were starved and worked to death. So that in Russia, these are considered also victims of the Holocaust. So that adds, to the number of people who were killed in the Holocaust. So hundreds of thousands of these just in the first year. So there's some things that are specific to the dynamic of World War II, but there is some kind of pattern here of how these Western armies lash out against civilians, target civilians, and are more than capable of avenging their military losses on civilians. Hitler's kind of targeting of the Jews specifically in this ideological way became more and more unhinged and fanatical as the war kept going worse and worse for the Germans. So, I mean, that's the main point. That's the main point I wanted to talk to you about. If you do check out Arno Meyer's book, which I recommend, the military history is good, and the way he connects it to the genocide is also very, very well done. He talks about this meeting at once. He goes all the way to the complete defeat of Nazi Germany in 44, 45. So those are the main things I wanted to talk about today. I've been thinking about this this issue, this historical parallel for weeks now. So I wanted to talk to you about that. And then, of course, the many headlines that we covered on the many fronts. So I'm sure there will be more surprises and things to talk about over the next few days. And until then, I'll sign off now. As I mentioned at the beginning, please like and subscribe, and check out my other stuff. Check out my podcast. I have a Substack you can check out. I have a website which mainly deals with the podcast, and I did write a book envisioning how a future war of liberation in Gaza would go. It's called Siege Breakers, and maybe one day I'll do a video just on that for those who are new. So I'll stop there, and I'll see you again very soon.